In the heart of Bangkok's oldest district, where ancient temples stood alongside modern convenience stores, Master Chen Wei's modest karate dojo occupied a weathered two-story building. The faded sign above the entrance read, Path of Peace Martial Arts, though most locals simply called it Old Chen School. At 65 years old, Master Chen moved with the grace of a man half his age. His silver hair was always neatly trimmed, and despite the tropical heat, he maintained perfect posture in his crisp white karate. Every morning, he would sweep the sidewalk in front of his dojo before sunrise, exchanging gentle nods with the early rising street vendors who knew him as a fixture of their community. The dojo itself was a testament to simplicity. Unlike the fancy martial arts chains that had sprouted across Bangkok with their mirrors and expensive equipment, Chen's school contained only the basics: well-worn training mats, a few striking pads, and walls adorned with traditional calligraphy emphasizing virtues like respect, discipline, and humility. The wooden floors, though scratched from decades of use, were polished to a soft shine each evening by Chen himself. What made Chen's dojo special wasn't its appearance but its students. While other schools catered to wealthy tourists and businessmen's children, Chen focused on teaching the neighborhood's struggling youth. Many of his students came from families who could barely afford daily meals, let alone martial arts training. Chen never turned away a child who showed genuine interest, often teaching for free or accepting payment in the form of help around the dojo. Among his current students was 15-year-old Sam Kai, a former street kid who had tried to rob Chen's convenience store neighbor 6 months ago. Instead of calling the police, Chen had offered the boy a chance to learn discipline through martial arts. Now, Sam Kai arrived early each morning to help clean the dojo and was showing remarkable progress in both his training and schoolwork. Chen's teaching methods were as unique as his student selection. He didn't believe in belt tests or rapid advancement. His students learned at their own pace, focusing on mastering basics before moving to complex techniques. A strong house needs a strong foundation, he often said in his soft, measured voice. This philosophy didn't make his school popular with those seeking quick results, but it created skilled martial artists who understood the true meaning of discipline. The master's daily routine was predictable yet purposeful. He woke at 4:30 a.m. for his personal training and meditation. By 6 o'clock a.m., he was teaching his morning adult class, mostly composed of working people from the neighborhood. Throughout the day, he alternated between teaching children's classes and maintaining the dojo. Evenings were reserved for advanced students and private lessons. What few people knew was that Chen had once been a renowned competitor in his youth. Photographs tucked away in his small office showed a younger Chen accepting trophies at international tournaments. But he never spoke of these achievements to his students. To him, true martial arts wasn't about winning competitions but about building character. The neighborhood had changed dramatically during Chen's 30 years of teaching in Bangkok. Small shops had been replaced by convenience store chains, and many old residents had moved away. Yet Chen remained, adapting to the changes while maintaining his principles. He lived simply in the small apartment above his dojo, eating little more than his books, his tea set, and his daily practice. Recent months had brought new challenges. A large development company had been buying up properties in the area, planning to build luxury condominiums. Several neighboring businesses had already sold their buildings and moved away. Chen had received numerous offers for his property, each more generous than the last, but he politely declined them all. His dojo wasn't just a building. It was a sanctuary for those who needed guidance and structure in their lives. On this particular morning, as Chen prepared for his first class, he had no way of knowing that his peaceful routine was about to be dramatically interrupted. The annual Royal Festival was approaching, bringing with it increased security measures and tensions in the usually quiet neighborhood. While Chen focused on teaching his students the way of peace and harmony, forces were already in motion that would soon test everything he believed in. Little did he know that his dedication to teaching and his unwavering principles were about to collide with authority in a way that would change not only his life, but the lives of many others in ways he couldn't imagine. As he adjusted a student's stance during the morning class, the streets outside his dojo were already filling with royal guards preparing for the upcoming festival. The morning of the royal festival brought an unusual bustle to Bangkok's Old Quarter. Streets that normally hosted food vendors and schoolchildren were now filled with stern-faced guards in crisp uniforms. Among them, Captain Sutha strode with an air of superiority, his polished boots clicking against the pavement and his pressed uniform adorned with medals that caught the morning sun. At 68 years old, Mrs. Praney had been selling her famous mango sticky rice from the same corner for over 3 decades. Her small cart, weathered but clean, was a neighborhood institution. Even on regular days, she knew exactly where to position her cart to comply with local regulations. But today, with the festival preparations, the usual boundaries had changed without notice. The trouble began when Mrs. Praney wheeled her cart to her regular spot, unaware that it had been designated as a restricted zone for the festival. She had just finished setting up her display of fresh mangoes when Captain Sutha spotted her from across the street. His face darkened with what his subordinates recognized as dangerous anger. "You!" Captain Sutha's voice boomed across the street. "Remove this eyesore immediately." He marched toward Mrs. Praney's cart, his hand resting meaningfully on his baton. Several younger guards followed him, looking uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Mrs. Praney, her weathered hands trembling, tried to explain that she hadn't seen any signs marking the area as restricted. Her gentle voice quivered as she promised to move right away, but Captain Sutha wasn't interested in explanations. With a dramatic sweep of his arm, he knocked several mangoes from her display onto the ground. The commotion drew the attention of morning shoppers and local vendors. Among them was Master Chen, who had just finished his morning class and stepped out to buy fresh fruit for his students. He watched as Captain Sutha grabbed Mrs. Praney's cart roughly, causing more fruit to tumble onto the street. "Please," Mrs. Praney pleaded. "These mangoes are my entire day's income." She bent down slowly, her aged joints protesting, to retrieve the scattered fruit. Captain Sutha's response was to kick one of the mangoes away, sending it rolling into the gutter. Several onlookers had pulled out their phones, recording the scene with concerned expressions. The younger guards shifted uncomfortably, but none dared to challenge their superior's behavior. Captain Sutha seemed to enjoy the attention, playing to his audience with exaggerated gestures of authority. "The law must be respected," he announced loudly, clearly aware of the cameras. "We cannot have these illegal vendors disrupting the royal festival." He reached for Mrs. Praney's arm, presumably to move her away from the cart. That was when Master Chen stepped forward. His movements were calm and deliberate as he positioned himself between Mrs. Praney and the captain. Despite wearing his simple white jay, still slightly damp from his morning training, Chen's presence commanded attention. "Honorable Captain," Chen spoke softly but clearly, "perhaps we can resolve this situation peacefully. Mrs. Praney has served this community for decades with dignity. She meant no disrespect to the festival preparations." Captain Sutha's face reddened at this interruption. He turned to face Chen, taking in the old man's martial arts uniform with obvious disdain. "And who might you be to question royal authority?" he sneered, puffing out his chest to emphasize the medals on his uniform. The gathering crowd had grown larger, with more phones recording the confrontation. Local residents who knew both Mrs. Praney and Master Chen watched with concerned expressions. They had seen Chen break up fights between rowdy teenagers and calm angry customers at neighboring shops, always without violence. But this was different. This was a direct confrontation with royal authority. "I am simply a teacher," Chen replied, maintaining his calm demeanor. "One who believes that true authority comes from how we treat those weaker than ourselves." His words, though respectful, carried an unmistakable challenge. Captain Sutha's eyes narrowed dangerously. The younger guards behind him exchanged worried glances, recognizing the signs of their superior's notorious temper. The air grew thick with tension as the captain took a step closer to Chen, his hand still resting on his baton. Mrs. Praney tried to intervene, tugging gently at Chen's sleeve. "Please, Master Chen, don't trouble yourself, I will leave." But both men seemed locked in a silent battle of wills, neither willing to back down. The stage was set for a confrontation that would soon spiral far beyond a simple dispute over a fruit cart's location. As the morning sun climbed higher in the Bangkok sky, no one in the growing crowd could have predicted just how this encounter would change their community forever. The tension in the air was electric as Captain Sutha circled Master Chen like a predator sizing up its prey. The crowd had grown even larger, forming a loose circle around the two men. Morning traffic came to a standstill as drivers stopped to watch the unfolding drama. "So, The karate teacher thinks he can interfere with royal security, Captain Sutha announced loudly, playing to his audience. His hand moved from his baton to adjust his collar, making his medals jingle. Perhaps you'd like to demonstrate your expertise against a trained royal guard. Chen remained perfectly still, his weathered face showing no emotion. There is no need for demonstrations, Captain. I simply ask that you allow Mrs. Prenny to move her cart peacefully. His voice was steady and carried clearly across the now silent street. But Captain Sutha was not interested in peaceful resolutions. Years of unchallenged authority had fed his ego, and now, with dozens of phones recording, he saw an opportunity to assert his dominance. No, no, he said with a mocking smile. You question my authority. Now you must prove your worth, old man. The younger guards looked increasingly uncomfortable. One of them, a fresh-faced recruit named Sumche, stepped forward hesitantly. Sir, perhaps we should. Silence. Sutha barked, causing the young guard to step back quickly. The captain removed his ceremonial jacket, handing it to another guard. Clear some space, he ordered the crowd. The karate master wants to teach us a lesson. Chen shook his head slowly. Violence is unnecessary, Captain. We can resolve this with words. But even as he spoke, he subtly shifted his stance, his feet finding solid positions on the uneven pavement. Mrs. Pranny had begun to cry softly, her hands clasped together in worry. Several onlookers helped her move her cart to safety, while others positioned themselves to get better camera angles of the impending confrontation. Enough talk. Sutha suddenly lunged forward, throwing a heavy punch aimed at Chen's face. The movement was quick for a man his size, but to the trained observers in the crowd, it was obvious he relied more on strength than technique. Chen wasn't there when the punch arrived. With a movement so subtle it was almost invisible, he had shifted slightly, causing Sutha's fist to pass harmlessly through empty air. The captain stumbled slightly, surprised by the miss. Angry now, Sutha launched a series of aggressive attacks, punches, kicks, and grabs, each more forceful than the last. But Chen moved like water, never quite where the captain's attacks landed, yet never seeming to move much at all. It was as if he knew where each strike would land before Sutha threw it. The crowd watched in amazement as the elderly karate master made the younger, larger man look increasingly foolish. Sutha's face had turned red with exertion and anger, his carefully pressed uniform now dark with sweat stains. Stand still and fight. Sutha roared, launching a powerful roundhouse kick. This time, Chen didn't just evade. His hands moved in a blur, catching the captain's leg and using the momentum to send him spinning. Sutha landed hard on his backside, his dignity suffering more damage than his body. The crowd gasped. Several of the younger guards took involuntary steps forward, but stopped when Chen raised his hand in a peaceful gesture. Please, Captain, he said calmly, let us end this now. There is no honor in further conflict. But Sutha, humiliated and enraged, scrambled to his feet and charged at Chen like a bull. This time, Chen was forced to act more decisively. His movements were precise and efficient, a slight turn, a gentle redirect, and suddenly Captain Sutha found himself flying through the air. The captain landed with a thud next to Mrs. Praney's fallen mangoes, his uniform now stained with fruit juice and dirt. The crowd erupted in a mix of cheers and shocked murmurs. Dozens of phones captured every moment of his defeat. Chen immediately bowed to the fallen captain and offered his hand. I apologize for any embarrassment, Captain. Shall we now discuss Mrs. Praney's situation calmly? But Sutha slapped the offered hand away and struggled to his feet. His face was a mask of pure hatred as he pointed a trembling finger at Chen. You will regret this. No one humiliates a royal guard and goes unpunished. He turned to his subordinates. Arrest him. The younger guards hesitated, looking between their captain and the calm karate master. The crowd moved closer, phone still recording, creating an uncertain atmosphere. What had started as a simple dispute over a fruit cart's location had escalated into something much more significant. A challenge to authority that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. The aftermath of Chen's defense unfolded like a scene from a movie, played out in the bright morning sun of Bangkok's streets. The young guards, faced with Captain Sutha's order to arrest Chen, remained frozen in indecision. Their training had never prepared them for a situation where their superior had so clearly abused his authority and been humbled as a result. One of the guards, the young Samkai who had tried to intervene earlier, stepped forward again, but this time, instead of approaching Chen, he turned to face his captain. "Sir, there are dozens of witnesses with video evidence. Perhaps we should consider." Silence. Sutha roared, spittle flying from his lips. He struggled to his feet, his once immaculate uniform now stained with mango juice and street dirt. "I am your commanding officer. Arrest this man immediately." The crowd, which had grown even larger, began to murmur angrily. Several local shopkeepers stepped forward to stand beside Chen. Mrs. Prenny, despite her fear, also moved closer to the karate master who had defended her. Chen remained perfectly calm, his hands relaxed at his sides. "Young officers," he addressed the guards directly, ignoring Sutha's continued ranting, "you have sworn to protect and serve. Consider carefully whether arresting someone for preventing abuse of power honors that oath." The impact of his words was visible on the young guards' faces. They looked at each other, then at their phones, which had been buzzing constantly. The videos of the incident were already spreading across social media like wildfire. Suddenly, a sleek black car pulled up to the scene. A distinguished-looking man in a formal suit stepped out, Inspector Pravat of the Royal Police Internal Affairs Division. His presence caused an immediate shift in the atmosphere. "What do we have here?" Inspector Pravat asked calmly, though his eyes took in every detail of the scene: the scattered mangoes, the disheveled captain, the calm karate master, and the crowd of witnesses with their phones still recording. Before Sutha could speak, multiple witnesses stepped forward, eager to show their videos. The inspector watched several clips in silence, his expression growing more serious with each viewing. The videos showed not only the confrontation, but also Sutha's initial harassment of Mrs. Pranny and his unprovoked attack on Chen. "Captain Sutha," Inspector Pravat finally spoke, "I believe you should return to headquarters immediately. We have much to discuss." His tone left no room for argument. Sutha's face went through a range of emotions: anger, fear, and finally, a kind of desperate resignation. "This isn't over," he hissed at Chen before being led away by two of his own guards. Inspector Pravat turned to Chen and bowed slightly. "Master Chen Wei, I believe. Your reputation precedes you. The royal palace has long been aware of your work with troubled youth in this community." Chen returned the bow, deeper and more respectful. "You are too kind, Inspector. I only wish to maintain peace in our neighborhood." The inspector nodded thoughtfully. "We will need your statement, of course, and those of the witnesses. But first," he turned to Mrs. Praney and smiled gently. "Madam, please allow me to help you reset your display. I believe the festival preparations can accommodate your traditional spot after all." The crowd broke into approving murmurs as several people, including the inspector himself, helped Mrs. Pranny clean up and restore her cart. Chen quietly began picking up scattered mangoes, examining each one carefully. Throughout the rest of the morning, people came forward to share their stories with Inspector Pravat. Many spoke of previous incidents involving Captain Sutha, of intimidation and demands for bribes. Each testimony was carefully recorded, each video collected as evidence. Chen returned to his dojo only after ensuring Mrs. Praney was safely re-established in her spot. His students, who had gathered outside during the commotion, looked at their teacher with new eyes. They had always known he was skilled, but seeing him defend the helpless while remaining true to his principles of minimal force had taught them more than any regular lesson could. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the crowd gradually dispersed, but the impact of the morning's events continued to spread through social media and news channels. What had started as a simple act of standing up for an elderly vendor had evolved into something much larger, a moment that would force the Royal Guard to confront issues of accountability and abuse of power within its ranks. Unknown to Chen, as he calmly resumed his daily teaching schedule, his actions that morning would catalyze changes that would reach far beyond their quiet neighborhood. By evening, the video of Chen's encounter with Captain Sutha had spread across every major social media platform in Thailand. News vans lined the street outside the Path of Peace martial arts dojo, their reporters eager for interviews that Chen politely declined. Inside, he continued teaching his evening class as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The royal palace, however, was in crisis mode. In a sleek conference room high above Bangkok's streets, Senior officials gathered for an emergency meeting. The walls were lined with screens showing various news channels, all featuring the viral video of their royal guard's humiliation. "This is a public relations disaster," declared Minister Thowat, head of palace security. He gestured at one screen where a reporter was interviewing witnesses from the morning's incident. "Every channel is running the story. Social media is calling Chen a hero and demanding investigation into guard conduct." Inspector Pravat, who had been reviewing files all afternoon, cleared his throat. "Minister, I'm afraid it's worse than that. Our preliminary investigation has uncovered a pattern of abuse under Captain Southa's command. We've received dozens of complaints just today. Shopkeepers reporting extortion, vendors describing harassment, even junior guards alleging misconduct." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Years of carefully maintained public image were threatening to unravel because of one morning's events. The palace's reputation for dignity and justice was at stake. Meanwhile, in a small office at Royal Guard headquarters, Captain Southa sat before a disciplinary board. His once proud posture was gone, replaced by a nervous slouch. His uniform, though changed, couldn't hide his diminished presence. "Explain yourself, Captain," commanded General Wizet, his voice heavy with disappointment. How did a simple vendor violation escalate into this catastrophe? Southa's explanation was a jumble of excuses and accusations, each sounding weaker than the last. As he spoke, more reports arrived. Anonymous tips about bribes, documented cases of abuse, financial irregularities in his unit's records. Back at the dojo, Chen finished his last class of the day. As his students bowed and left, an elegant woman in a business suit entered. She introduced herself as Ms. Siraporn, the palace's chief public relations advisor. "Master Chen," she began diplomatically, "the palace wishes to handle this situation with wisdom and grace. We would appreciate your cooperation in resolving this unfortunate incident quietly." Chen served her tea in his simple office, listening patiently to suggestions of private settlements and mutual statements. When she finished, he spoke softly but firmly. "Respectfully, Miss Siraporn, this incident is not about me. It's about the abuse of power and the trust placed in those who wear the Royal Guard uniform. That trust must be restored through actions, not words." As night fell over Bangkok, the story continued to evolve. Local television stations aired interviews with other vendors who had suffered under Southa's authority. Junior guards, emboldened by the day's events, came forward with their own stories of witnessing misconduct. The palace found itself forced to act decisively. Shortly before midnight, they issued a statement announcing a full investigation into guard conduct and practices. Captain Southa was suspended pending review, and a commission would be formed to examine all complaints against the Royal Guard unit. In his apartment above the dojo, Chen sat in meditation, unaware of the political waves he had created. His phone buzzed constantly with messages of support and media requests, all unanswered. To him, the day's events were simply a necessary response to injustice, nothing more. Mrs. Prenny, closing her cart for the night, found her sales had doubled. Customers had flocked to her spot all day, many buying mangoes just to show support. Several had shared stories of similar encounters with Southa, expressing relief that someone had finally stood up to him. The young guard Samchai, who had tried to intervene, was called to testify before the commission. His honest account of Southa's leadership style and the culture of fear he created added another damning piece to the growing evidence. As Bangkok prepared for sleep, the implications of the morning's confrontation continued to ripple outward. What had begun as one man standing up for an elderly vendor had evolved into a movement for accountability and reform within one of Thailand's most respected institutions. The palace officials, working late into the night, realized they faced a choice: either make meaningful changes to restore public trust or risk losing the respect their position had always commanded. The next days would prove crucial in determining which path they would choose. 3 days after the incident, Inspector Pravat stood in his office, surrounded by stacks of files and evidence boxes. What had started as an investigation into Captain Southa's conduct had uncovered something far more troubling. The inspector's whiteboard was covered with names, dates, and connections that painted a disturbing picture of corruption. "It's an entire network," he explained to his superiors via video conference. Captain Southa wasn't working alone. We've uncovered systematic extortion reaching into multiple districts. He held up a ledger found in Sutha's office. The investigation team had worked around the clock, following paper trails and interviewing witnesses who were finally willing to speak. Shop owners described a protection racket operating under the guise of security fees for royal events. Street vendors told of being forced to pay weekly permit renewal charges that never appeared in official records. Meanwhile, at the royal palace, the commission reviewing guard conduct made another shocking discovery. Several high-ranking officers had been aware of Sutha's activities but had turned a blind eye, likely in exchange for a share of the profits. The corruption had spread like a cancer through the ranks. Chen's dojo had become an unexpected hub for people coming forward with information. Though he never sought this role, his act of standing up to Sutha had made him a trusted figure. People felt safe sharing their stories with the humble karate master who had dared to challenge authority. Master Chen, one elderly shopkeeper confided, sliding a stack of receipts across his desk. "I've kept these for 3 years. They show all the extra payments Captain Sutha demanded. I was afraid to speak up before, but now." The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records revealed multiple offshore accounts linked to Sutha and his associates. Surveillance footage showed late-night meetings with other corrupt officials. Even some of Sutha's own guards, freed from their fear of retaliation, provided damaging testimony. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. The young guard Sum Chai, who had tried to intervene during the mango cart incident, produced a secret journal. He had documented instances of misconduct since joining the force, hoping someday to expose the truth. "I joined the Royal Guard to serve with honor," Samkai explained to the investigators. "But under Captain Sutha, we were just thugs in uniform. He made us collect bribes, threaten people, abuse our authority." As the investigation deepened, the scale of corruption became clear. The network extended beyond the Royal Guard into other departments. Some officials had grown wealthy from years of extortion and kickbacks, all while wearing the respected uniform of the palace. Inspector Pravat's team worked methodically, building an airtight case. They followed money trails, cross-referenced testimonies, and gathered surveillance footage. Each new piece of evidence revealed another layer of corruption. The palace faced a crucial decision. Keeping the investigation quiet would protect their reputation in the short term but allow corruption to continue. Full transparency might damage their image initially, but could restore public trust in the long run. In his cell, Captain Sutha began to crack under pressure. Realizing his former allies were abandoning him, he offered to provide names and details in exchange for leniency. His confession implicated several high-ranking officials and exposed the full extent of the corruption network. Mrs. Praney's simple fruit cart had become a symbol of the common people's struggle against abuse of power. Journalists interviewed her regularly, and her story appeared in international news. She handled the attention with grace, always crediting Master Chen for giving her the courage to stand up for herself. The investigation's findings sent shockwaves through Bangkok's power structure. Several officials resigned ahead of likely charges. Others scrambled to distance themselves from Sutha and his network. The Royal Guard itself faced a complete reorganization. Through it all, Chen maintained his regular teaching schedule. He declined interviews and avoided publicity, focusing instead on his students and his community. When asked about his role in exposing the corruption, he would simply say, "I only did what was right in that moment." The rest came from people finding their own courage to speak truth. As the 6th day of the investigation drew to a close, Inspector Pravat prepared to present his findings to the palace leadership. The evidence was clear. What had appeared to be a simple case of one guard's misconduct had revealed a systemic problem that would require extensive reforms to address. The real question now was how the palace would respond to this crisis, and whether they would embrace the opportunity for meaningful change that Chen's simple act of defiance had created. 1 week after the initial incident, the royal palace made an unprecedented announcement. In a televised address, the palace spokesperson revealed their comprehensive response to the corruption scandal. The gilded halls of the palace press room fell silent as she outlined their ambitious reform plan. "The palace extends its deepest apologies to all citizens who have suffered from abuse of power," she began. "Today, we announce sweeping changes to restore honor to the Royal Guard and trust in our institution." The reforms were bold and far-reaching. All current guard commanders would be evaluated by an independent committee. New oversight mechanisms would be established. Most surprisingly, they announced the creation of a civilian review board to monitor guard conduct. Then came the unexpected offer to Master Chen. We formally invite Master Chen Wei to lead the new Ethics and Training Division of the Royal Guard, the spokesperson announced. His demonstrated commitment to justice and honorable conduct represents the values we seek to restore. The news caught Chen completely off guard. He was teaching a children's class when the announcement was made, focused on helping a young student perfect her stance. His phone began buzzing incessantly with messages, but he finished the lesson before even checking them. Later that evening, a palace delegation arrived at his dojo. They found Chen cleaning the training mats, just as he did every day. The contrast between their formal attire and his simple white jai was striking. Master Chen, the delegation leader, began, "This is a unique opportunity. Your experience and wisdom could transform the Royal Guard. The palace is prepared to offer you full authority over training methods and ethical standards." Chen listened politely, serving tea to his visitors as he had done countless times before. When they finished their pitch, he remained silent for a long moment, looking out at his modest dojo. "I am honored by the offer," he finally said, "but my place is here, with my students. These children need guidance more than the palace needs my help." The delegation was stunned. They had come prepared for salary negotiations, not outright refusal. They tried different approaches, appealing to his sense of duty, offering more resources for his dojo, even suggesting he could do both jobs. But Chen remained firm. "The palace doesn't need me to teach ethics," he explained gently. "It needs to remember its own traditions of service and honor. Sometimes the best teaching comes from example, not instruction." The delegation left disappointed, but Chen's response only increased the palace's respect for him. Here was a man who couldn't be bought or swayed by power, exactly the kind of integrity they needed to restore. The next day, a different kind of visitor arrived at the dojo, Inspector Pravat. He came alone, without ceremony, and asked to speak with Chen privately. "Your refusal of the palace position has created an interesting situation," Pravat explained. "But perhaps there's a middle way. What if you could continue your work here while also helping to reshape the guard's future?" Chen listened as Pravat outlined a compromise. Instead of taking a formal position, Chen could serve as an advisor, providing guidance on training programs while maintaining his independence. His dojo could become a model for the new ethical standards the palace wanted to implement. This time, Chen saw potential in the proposal. It would allow him to influence positive change while staying true to his principles and his community. "I will consider it," he said, "on one condition. The palace must first demonstrate its commitment to reform through actions, not just words." Pravat smiled, having expected such a response. He pulled out a tablet showing draft proposals for the new Civilian Oversight Committee, including representatives from various community groups. The palace was already moving forward with reforms, with or without Chen's direct involvement. As news of Chen's refusal of the palace position spread, it only enhanced his reputation. People saw it as further proof of his integrity, a man who chose his principles over power and prestige. The local community celebrated his decision. Mrs. Praney brought special mango sticky rice to the dojo, and other vendors contributed their specialties. Students' parents organized a small celebration, though Chen insisted it be turned into a training demonstration instead. As the day ended, Chen sat in his usual meditation spot above the dojo. The city lights twinkled below as he considered Pravat's compromise proposal. Perhaps there was a way to help guide the reforms while staying true to his calling as a teacher. The path forward was becoming clear, though not in the way anyone had expected. Sometimes, Chen reflected, the most powerful changes come not from taking control, but from showing others the way through example. 1 year after the incident that changed everything, Bangkok's old quarter had transformed in subtle but significant ways. The Path of Peace martial arts dojo now bore a small plaque identifying it as a center of excellence in ethical training, though Chen had insisted it remain otherwise unchanged. Inspector Pravat's compromise had worked better than anyone expected. Chen had remained primarily a teacher at his dojo, but his influence spread far beyond its walls. The palace had implemented his suggestions for reform, creating a training program that emphasized ethical conduct alongside physical skills. Perhaps the most surprising student was former Captain Sutha himself. After serving 6 months in detention and losing his position, he had appeared at Chen's door one morning, head bowed in genuine humility. "I have lost everything," Sutha had said, "but in losing, I finally see what I never had, true honor." Chen had accepted him as a student, starting him at the beginning like any other. Now, Sutha trained alongside children and teenagers, learning the deeper meanings of martial arts that he had missed in his previous life. Mrs. Praney's mango cart had become a symbol of the neighborhood's transformation. She now headed a vendors association that worked directly with the new Civilian Oversight Committee, ensuring fair treatment for all street merchants. Her corner had become a popular spot where royal guards and vendors chatted amicably over fresh mango sticky rice. The young guard Sum Chai, who had tried to intervene that fateful day, had been promoted to lead the guard's new community relations unit. He regularly visited Chen's dojo, not just to train, but to maintain the bridge between the palace and the community. One morning, as Chen swept the sidewalk as usual, a sleek official car pulled up. From it emerged the palace's chief minister, who had come to see firsthand the program that was being hailed as a model for law enforcement reform across Southeast Asia. "Master Chen," the minister said, bowing respectfully, "your impact has exceeded our highest hopes. Would you share with me the secret of your success?" Chen leaned his broom against the wall and gestured to the minister to follow him inside. They watched as students of all ages and backgrounds trained together. Former guards alongside street vendors' children, office workers practicing beside former troublemakers. "The secret," Chen explained softly, "is that there is no secret. True strength comes from serving others. True authority comes from earning respect, not demanding it. These are ancient wisdoms that we sometimes forget in our modern world." The minister nodded thoughtfully, watching as Sutha helped a young student perfect her stance, showing the same patience that Chen had shown him. The dojo had become more than a training facility. It was a living example of transformation and redemption. Visitors from other countries now came to study this unique approach to law enforcement reform, where martial arts principles became a bridge between authority and community. Chen's students had also transformed. The troubled youth he had taken in now helped teach younger children, passing on not just techniques but values. His adult students brought their workplace conflicts to him for guidance, spreading his philosophy of peaceful resolution throughout the city. As the first anniversary of the incident approached, the palace announced the full implementation of their reform training program. All new guards would now spend time learning at community dojos like Chen's, understanding that true strength lay in protecting and serving, not in wielding power. Chen himself remained unchanged by all the attention. He still lived simply above his dojo, swept the sidewalk each morning, and focused on teaching his students. But his quiet example had created ripples that continued to spread outward, touching lives far beyond his modest neighborhood. On the anniversary evening, as Chen finished his last class, he found his dojo filled with people, students, guards, vendors, and community members, all gathered to celebrate not just the changes of the past year, but the promise of the future. Mrs. Praney served her famous mango sticky rice. Sutha demonstrated his progress with a group of young students. Palace officials chatted easily with local vendors, and in the midst of it all, Chen quietly went about cleaning his dojo, just as he had done every day for the past 30 years, proving that the greatest changes often come from simply doing what is right, day after day, without seeking recognition or reward. The story of the karate master who humbled a royal guard had become legend, but its true legacy lived on in the daily interactions between authority and community, in the lessons learned and passed on, and in the continuing journey toward justice and harmony in the streets of Bangkok.